Okay, thank you. Let us get started. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this side event session at the 2022 Asia Clean Energy Forum. Asia Clean Energy Forum is brought to you by the ADB. It's an annual event, and this very side event this year is brought to you by the Clean Energy Ministerial CCUS initiative. My name is Juho Lipponen, and I'm the coordinator of the initiative, and I'll be the host of today's event, and with a great lineup of speakers and moderators, and who we will introduce to you in a moment. The Clean Energy Ministerial is a global process to accelerate clean energy. Green countries in the map in the center of the slide are the ones who participate in the work of the CEM. And the next Clean Energy Ministerial meeting is going to be hosted by the United States in September this year. Under the CEM, there are a number of work streams, work groups, if you like, that work across several clean energy topics. And the CCUS initiative is one of these many initiatives. You'll see on the left-hand side the countries who participate in our work, and that gives you a glimpse of who is involved from the country's side. And we also have several linkages and collaborative activities with the finance sector, with industry, with different organizations, and so forth. And we gather together to learn from each other and to accelerate CCUS deployment together. That's in a nutshell, our work. The ADB tweeted this slide yesterday, I think at the start or ahead of the Clean Energy Forum. I think it was a very timely moment to tweet this. So the battle against climate change will be won or lost in Asia and the Pacific. Obviously, nobody's off the hook here. It's not only lost and won in the Asia and Pacific, but as figures show, that's where the lion's share of CO2 emissions currently are. And I think it's extremely timely to be discussing different clean energy technologies, including carbon capture and storage. That is part of the portfolio of clean energy solutions going forward. Let's keep this in mind as we move through the agenda of today's meeting. And here is our agenda. After the introduction, we will hear a scene-setting presentation from the IEA. Carl Greenfield will give us a presentation on the need to deploy CCUS, and he has promised to put emphasis on the Asia region. After Carl's presentation, we have two roundtables. The first one will be discussing the roles of different types of finance sector players in scaling up and deploying CCUS in Asia. This session will be moderated by Jocelyn Taylor from the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources of Australia. And after the first session, which takes about half an hour, we have a second roundtable concentrating on governments as drivers for CCUS in Asia. And again, Jocelyn is moderating this session too. And we will close an hour and a half from now, promptly at 9:30 Manila time. With that, I'm going to stop the screen share and hand it over to Carl for the IEA scene-setting presentation. Carl, please.
Great, thank you, Juho. Exactly right on time, which is amazing. I put together a couple slides to, as Juho mentioned, set the scene for the discussion we have today. So, good morning, afternoon, and evening. Many thanks to Juho and the CEM CCUS initiative, as well as ADB for putting on this event and this workshop. As Juho mentioned, I'm Carl Greenfield. I'm an analyst, CCUS unit at the International Energy Agency. We have a pretty distinguished group of panelists lined up today to discuss how CCUS financing and investment can be accelerated in Asia. And with that, let's get started. So before diving into Asia Pacific specifically, I wanted to provide a little context of what we're seeing in CCUS globally, where we're going, and really where we need to go. Over the last few years, CCUS has experienced an unprecedented momentum. If you're working in this space and you're like myself, you've received dozens, if not hundreds, of email notifications of the project announcements, the MOUs, the signed cooperations, et cetera. And in fact, since the start of 2021, over 160 new projects have been announced. And we've seen this appetite for CCUS before, albeit not to the same extent. Following the 08-09 global financial crisis, CCUS appeared poised for a major expansion. Billions of dollars in public support was made available to a handful of integrated projects around the world. But for a number of factors, this momentum fizzled out, and those projects, very few of which actually became operational. Number of reasons for this. Some projects simply couldn't accelerate fast enough to meet the near-term spending milestones for the stimulus programs. Other projects proved to be more complex and expensive than previously thought. In several instances, the available support was limited to one-off capital grants for select projects, rather than establishing a broader framework for CCUS investment, which we know is incredibly important. And the momentum most recently, it's different than post 2008, mainly because of the different drivers for this momentum. First, there is a growing recognition that CCUS is necessary to meet net zero goals. At the national level, regional level, global level, we see this, and also even the corporate level. Second, there is a growing interest to produce low carbon hydrogen, which has resulted in almost 50 facilities that are currently under development to capture CO2 from hydrogen-related processes. And finally, the investment environment for CCUS has substantially improved as a result of new policy incentives. And as we'll see from the panels later today, this investment and finance environment should and needs to be continually improved in order to deploy CCUS at a global scale. The United States and Europe are currently leading this global resurgence of CCUS. They account for around 3/4 of currently planned projects. This is in part driven by favorable policy incentives and funding opportunities in these areas. The big question is this enough? Short answer is not quite. So despite this momentum, we need to dramatically increase and accelerate CCUS efforts in order to stay on track with net zero pathways. Currently, as of last year, we captured around 40 million tons of CO2. According to the IEA's net zero emissions by 2050 scenario, this needs to ramp up to 1.6 billion tons, almost 1.6 billion tons in 2030, CO2 captured annually. That number further jumps to 7.6 billion tons by 2050 if we're to stay on a pathway towards net zero by mid-century. Now, as dramatic as this graph is, and as challenging and daunting as the task may seem globally, regionally, this provides an opportunity for new countries, new regions to step into the ring. As Juho mentioned, Asia and Asia Pacific region accounts for a lion's share of greenhouse gas emissions. The region's growing population and economy put its energy sector firmly in the global spotlight. And it's a large region, so while the energy story varies quite widely across the region, the role of fossil fuels and emissions-intensive industry in the power sectors, they threaten many countries' emission reduction efforts. Let's take Southeast Asia, for example. fossil fuels made up more than 90% of growth in energy demand between 2000 and 2020. Coal alone expanded by a factor of 6, and its share in total energy supply increased from 8% to 26% during this time period. CCUS provides an opportunity to reduce emissions from existing assets in the region, as well as those assets that are planned or even currently under construction. It provides an opportunity to enable low carbon hydrogen production and establish robust trading patterns within the region. And CCUS also provides an opportunity to reduce emissions from hard to abate sectors. Currently, just over 5 million tons of CO2 is captured per year in the Asia Pacific region. We include Australia in this, which accounts for nearly 2/3 of all the CO2 captured in the region. The rest is primarily from China. And at the same time, over the last few years, we've seen a growing interest from other countries in the region to deploy CCUS. Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. In some cases, this interest is really driven by the need to address emissions from young power and industrial assets, while at the same time maintaining economic growth and a strong job base for not only the existing fossil fuel producing industries, but also the consuming industries. In other cases, we see strong demand signals for low carbon fuels, such as hydrogen and ammonia. For example, in Indonesia, and Malaysia are cooperating with Japan to develop hydrogen, ammonia, CCUS supply chains. Similar initiatives are underway in Thailand and Singapore. And we see major oil and gas players in the region, such as Petronas, Pertamina, and PTT. They formulated plans to invest in these supply chains and carbon capture projects throughout the region. And this is often in partnership with international oil companies. Other countries are in the process of developing legal and regulatory frameworks to provide project developers greater clarity and ensure the safe and secure storage of CO2. You may hear about this later, but as an example, Indonesia recently announced that it's drafting regulations to establish a legal and regulatory framework for CCUS activities. The draft framework is based within the existing oil and gas regulations, and it will allow exploration and production permit holders to propose CCUS projects. The framework itself outlines requirements, much like other frameworks globally, requirements for monitoring, measurement, reporting, and verification of the stored CO2, and includes a liability transfer mechanism if certain conditions are met post-site closure. Once finalized, this draft framework has the potential to accelerate an already fast-growing CCUS sector in Indonesia. Now, based on projects currently under development, our projections show that annual capture capacity in the region is expected to increase nearly 9-fold by 2030. And while not all of these projects will eventually become operational, especially those projects that are currently in the concept and feasibility stages, which represent the bulk of this, right now is the time to start thinking strategically about how we can push projects through the timeline and how we can continue to not only encourage development, but continue to encourage a sustained investment structure for CCUS. So what steps are needed? How can we reduce the cost of carbon capture? What's needed to not only explore, but also develop CO2 storage resources in the region? What are the international financial mechanisms that can be leveraged to develop and deploy CCUS projects? And within all this, what are the roles that the government and the financial sector play in ensuring a robust CCUS sector within the region? These are all questions I'm sure that we'll touch on today. And with that, Juho, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks for a great scene setter. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, you could put back your previous slide just as a background. This one here, yeah. Since we have a couple of minutes before the panel start, Let me ask a question. We have a lot of Asia-based persons in the audience today. So, in particularly in Asia, can you talk a little bit about where you might see the best low-hanging fruit, if you like, for the first steps to start deploying CCUS?
Sure, of course. So to answer that, I think we should look back to the early applications for CCUS, because really the low-hanging fruits are the low-cost opportunities. So many of the early CCUS projects focused on industrial applications where CCUS can be captured at a relatively low additional cost. I have a slide here which shows the range of capture by application. For example, natural gas processing, CO2 that's in the gas usually needs to be separated out to meet market requirements or prior to liquefaction for LNG production to avoid CO2 freezing and damaging the production facilities. We see this in Australia. There's a strong interest in Indonesia, and the relative additional cost is pretty low. Other low-cost opportunities, especially for this and in the region, and especially within Southeast Asia, you see several oil and gas fields that are expected to come online in the coming years, and they have a high CO2 content. So this could be seen as a potential low-hanging fruit. See other applications like in bioethanol production. In the US, we have a plant in Illinois, steam methane reformers to produce hydrogen. These processes, the CO2 stream is relatively concentrated, so that reduces the cost and the amount of energy required in the capture process. So these, I would say, are some of those low-hanging fruits.
And if you had a minute, a very tall building elevator going up, what do you think would be the key points 1, 2, and 3 for start developing CCUS in particular in Asia?
There are several steps to really start developing within the region. One is to identify and develop opportunities for shared infrastructure deployment. And so there's a strong amount of clusters, industrial clusters within a region that are suited for capture projects, and a large potential for CO2 storage and depleted oil and gas reserves. And so regional cooperation will be key in ensuring that projects can be coordinated. Another point is identifying and developing those storage resources in parallel with establishing robust legal and regulatory frameworks. So we see this in Indonesia with the draft framework, and funding can be supported through different international programs such as the ADB. Another point is to encourage the early investment in CCUS projects. That means funding the pilot projects, the demonstration projects, studying industrial hubs, and looking at those targeted policies to where you can integrate CCUS into national and climate strategies. I know you mentioned 3, but I'll toss a 4th one in there pretty quickly, which is pretty important, is to build an international support and financing for CCUS in the region, which our panels will discuss later today. And so that's not only grants and loans from international development and climate finance institutions, but that also includes looking at the international capital markets and finding out what kind of range can we expect for CCUS opportunities within the region.
Great, super, Carl. Thanks a lot for these insights and for the few precisions afterwards. And that's great food for thought for the 2 panels that are following your talk now. So thank you very, very much. And I would like to pass the floor then over to Jocelyn Taylor from the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources of Australia, who will be the moderator of the 2 roundtables that we have lined up for you today. So over to you, Jocelyn.
Thanks, and welcome everybody from around the world. I hope you enjoyed tonight's 2 panels. I would like to introduce our speakers for the first panel. We have Marie Odenera from the MUFG Bank. We have Leonel Martinez from the ING Bank. We have Priyantha Wijayatunga from the ADB. We have Ian Havcroft from the GCCSI, and we have Wandong Cho from Carbon Korea. So welcome everybody. Our first panel of this event will discuss how we can start moving towards the deployment pathway that was presented by Carl. And we broadly will discuss 4 themes: why the organisation is interested, the roles of different finance sectors, the environment, social and government considerations, and collaboration. So firstly, we'll move to the first question. We'll just have a brief round of summaries from our panellists regarding why their organisations is interested in CCUS and why it is relevant for them. And I'd like to invite Priyantha to open the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jocelyn, and thank you for this opportunity. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are listening and participating in this particular event. As you could hear from IEA, obviously CCUS is one of the most important technologies when it comes to tackling climate change. And ADB, Asian Development Bank, is a very important player when it comes to infrastructure investments in the region, Asia Pacific region, and in particular energy sector investments. So naturally, we have a huge interest in supporting carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And also, in recent times, we have been focusing quite a lot on climate change-related interventions, much more than it used to be. In fact, we are aspiring to become a climate bank in the Asia-Pacific region, so which means, obviously, we are quite interested in financing CCUS. And on top of that, we have, obviously, Strategy 2030, where climate change cut across in several different operational priorities. And also recently we got the 2021 energy policy approved last year. And that also emphasizes the need for bringing in innovative technologies, where CCUS is one of the most important technologies, obviously based on the facts and figures put out by IEA. So all this really brought us into the importance of CCUS, and therefore, obviously, as the most important bank in this Asia-Pacific region, we are quite interested in taking this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyantha. Marie, sorry.
Hi, hi everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. So MUFG announced our carbon neutrality declaration in May 2021. We are implementing group-wide environmental measures globally, and our target is to achieve net zero GHG emissions from the financed portfolio by 2050 and from our own operation by 2030. So CCUS, according to the recent IPCC 6th assessment report, as well as IEA World Energy Outlook, is expected to play an important role in the reduction of CO2 emissions to realize global climate target. Well, this is especially the case in hard-to-abate sectors. In addition, combined with direct air capture and biomass energy, DACs and BACs are expected to be able to achieve negative emissions and reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we consider the wide deployment of CCUS will not only contribute to the global carbon neutrality, but also the decarbonization of our clients and our portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you. Lionel?
Thank you. From ING perspective, the bank signed up to the Katowice agreement back in 2018, which is basically a commitment to align the portfolio of the bank to the climate goals. And the balance sheet basically is being managed in line with the 2-degree scenario of the Paris Climate Agreement. So we recognize CCUS is very important in achieving that target. And therefore, we have established a new energy technology team within ING around the 3 technologies of hydrogen, carbon capture, and energy storage to support our clients in the energy transition. We recognize that trillions of investments are required for new energy technologies to achieve the Paris 2 degrees pathway scenario. And basically, we are building this dedicated team of experienced and knowledgeable professionals to work with our clients.
Thank you. Ian?
Thank you, Jocelyn. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Global CCS Institute is an international think tank and a member-based organization. And our main objective is to accelerate the deployment of CCS. So clearly we have quite a significant interest in the technology and its deployment. We recognize together with the technology more broadly and the development of the individual aspects of the process, that policy, law and regulation are obviously going to be critical to the deployment, but more and more finance is going to be key to securing the scale and magnitude of deployment that's necessary around the world. And that's particularly true of the Asia Pacific region, where we've seen, and we certainly heard from that in the first presentation from Carl at the IEA, the significant potential for deployment within Asia Pacific. And we recognize that we won't see deployment of the scale necessary unless we start to deploy finance to the level that will meet that objective. Thanks.
Thank you. And lastly, Wandong, please.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I'm everybody. This is a bit late night Korea, but it is very nice to see all of you. I'm in a bit the odd figure in this panel because I'm representing private sector. The mostly most of the panels are from either from bank or the institutions, but I'm sort of a private sector guy. The reason I want to join your panel is that the bankability of project. I want to talk about bankability of project. I think that basically lies in two aspects. One is that whether it is economical enough to fund, and whether it is big enough, namely scale and cost. So these two conditions must be met at the very stage of carbon capture, because it is the first stage of value chain, whether it is CCS or CCUS. So in that technology perspective, I like to join you as the panel goes on. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you. We will move on to the next question. And the next question is looking to the different roles of finance sector players. We have both multilateral banks and that have a policy-driven development mandate, and commercial banks who seek participation in various clean energy projects, which you've all just heard from our panel members. So I guess the question to the panel members now is, what are the roles of the different types of finance sector organisations in the acceleration of CCUS? Maybe expand a little bit more on your answer in the first question. Mari, please.
Right. As a commercial banker, we highly value the role the public funding has played to support R&Ds as well as early stage CCUS projects, and to a certain extent, the commercialization of projects. We also find it encouraging to see venture capitals and private equities showing their interest in CCUS, or indeed in negative emission projects. For us, commercial banks to take an active role in financing or bridging from demonstration to commercialization or scale up, we will need bankable business plans and adequate risk allocations that are specifically designed for CCUS projects. Public financings can support the project in a number of different ways. For example, through extended coverage of risk guarantees by export credit agencies, or new insurance products, which might cover specific risks, which commercial banks are hesitant to assume themselves.
Thank you. Lionel?
Yeah, thank you. I think I will follow on Mary's comments there. I think financial institutions like ING can help the clients review the bankability of the projects they're considering and assess the regulatory frameworks in terms of potential hurdles to overcome. So what we can do is really take the financials approach when people are considering a project and them review the different elements from the contractual perspective and just build this bankability picture, because at the end of the day, as a financial institution, we need to make sure that the capital remains protected when we deploy it, although we have this mandate to help the world move toward the 2-degree scenario pathway. As such, ING has already performed such studies. We already had the advisory mandate in the Netherlands for the Portos project, where we helped the sponsors review the bankability of the project. And basically, we are helping to review which financing structure were applicable and options and key projects agreement could be supported towards the financing. Yep.
Thank you. That generates a whole lot of questions, but we'll move on to Priyantha, please.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Of course, ADB is a development bank, so we have the important role to play as a development banker, and we have been working in this space for over 13 years. I think from 2009 we have been supporting CCUS, of course, with the support from various trust funds which we have had for some time. And our main function, of course, awareness generation. That's very, very important in our developing member countries to make people understand the importance of this and wherever it's possible to see whether they can be brought in and brought on board. And of course, on awareness is of course part of creating enabling environment. So creating enabling environment is part of our responsibility as a development bank. We can bringing in technical assistance or low-cost financing to support creation of enabling environment for CCUS. One of them, of course, bringing in the policy framework required. In most of these countries, the policy framework for CCUS is not present. It's not there. And then, of course, the capacity building, the manpower requirement which you need to bring a CCUS to the next stage. And that responsibility is also with us as a development financing institution. And then on top of that, most of these countries, it's very, very important that you demonstrate the feasibility of these technologies. And with that only, you eventually be able to persuade these countries to take up this technology, take up this challenge of investing in technology. So our role also is to bring in these pilot projects and finance them so that this can be demonstrated for acceptance by the countries where it's going to be invested in. At the end of the day, of course, we have the responsibility of investing also. That's our last stage, both sovereign financing and also we have private sector financing coming in. And we can eventually, once it's established that these technologies can be put in place in certain countries, we can bring in financing. So all these are different responsibilities we have as a development bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Wandol?
Yes, well, we're talking about commercialization of the CCUS, but still the technology is far too young to develop the kind of, to reach the stages. I brought the two dimensions for the bankability. One is the cost, and the Carl Greenfield showed us at the presentation, so far the lowest the carbon capture cost is about $50 US per ton. It ranges up to the 100 right now, but still we think that at least 30 US should be the milestone for the carbon capture, and also the scale is very small, and I have made some simple calculation, and the Carl showed us that this year, I mean last year, the total amount of CCUS is 10 million metric ton, and the number of the project is about 1,000. That means that each project's scale is something like 10,000. It is not a great scale large enough to fund for the commercial bank to fund. So I mean, this is zero. We have to work very hard, looking for the break technology. I understand that there is some sessions on the breakthrough technology in coming Friday, but I think I can tell you now that there is some development, not in unfortunately not in Asia, but in the United States. There are a number of reasons why United States has so much preparation of commercialization in due course, but by now I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, obviously, I'm not from a financial institution, but I mean, we've looked at this through various lenses over the past couple of years. In the context of securing deployment, the institute's put out previous work that's looked at this in a bit of detail, and we've tend to focus on where financial activity needs to take place and who are the imprimateurs for this. We recognize that private investment is really where we're going to see the significant need to reach CCS capital requirements, and we heard discussion from other panelists about the role of government in perhaps supporting initial deployment, but then we're going to need to see funding for CCS come from the debt, capital markets, and sovereign wealth funds, for example. Allied to that is the fact that governments themselves can also create an enabling environment for investment in CCS. So there is still clearly a role for government in supporting deployment beyond just the provision of finances, but also creating that enabling environment that we've just been talking about. I think sustainable finance is another area which can potentially benefit CCS deployment, and I know that's something that we may talk about in the next part of this conversation. But the role perhaps of taxonomies, for example, and sustainable bonds in incentivizing CCS may be pretty important. And then obviously we've got climate finance and some of the funding mechanisms that we just heard mention of from groups like the ADB, for example, that will be able to stimulate deployment in the region.
Thank you, Ian. All right, we will now move to the third area of our theme today, which is on environmental, social and governance, or ESG considerations, and how they can impact CCUS investment. ESG has become mainstream over the past years, and more emphasis is put on the role to transform the energy sector. And we're going to start with Ian from the GCCSI, who has recently published a report on this topic, and then we'll go to each panel member. Ian, back to you.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Yeah, as you've just mentioned, this is an area of strong interest for the Institute, and we've actually done a fair bit of work on this. And this was largely from members and a number of inquiries that we've received, really as to where CCS fits within the ESG story. And just taking a step back, I think I've seen a number of reports. There's figures quoted all the time as to the value of this sector. But I think I saw last year 600 billion was one estimated figure that was put into ESG focused funds worldwide just last year alone. So there's a significant opportunity here. When you break that down further within the acronym and you look at the E pillar of the ESG acronym, it's really climate which makes up a large element of that. So if you look at it as a potential opportunity and the value of the market there, then ensuring that carbon capture and storage is a part of that story is really quite critical. And that's really been the basis of a lot of our work over the past 12 to 18 months, looking at where CCS currently fits within the ESG story and how it can be better promoted and supported to ensure that that aspect of investment is reflected in the support that's provided to the technology.
Thank you, Ian. Wandong, your views?
Well, to be honest, since I'm representing private sector, especially for carbon capturing business, I have to say I have to look at ESG as a marketing. So far, I guess that most of the ESG is driven by the financial sector these days, especially institutional investors backed by institutions like Ian's. Those are very positive elements to cultivating CCUS. But the one aspect we have to, I need to ask a question to the older panelists that how the CCS, the carbon CCS is the best aligned with can be aligned with the coal-fired plant, but the coal-fired plant is a kind of a bias to the point of the institutional ESG. So, but that's true for the new plant. But what are you going to do with the existing plant? So, in order to have talk about CCUS for the real business, we need to talk about some the possibility of funding. The combination of CCUS with carbon capture coal-fired plant, and that's the point I want to make this time.
Thank you, Lionel.
Yep. Well, on the ESG topic, I think we have a mandate as ING to ensure that the investment we make are aligned with the ESG values, and we review project on their merits. So I think when we are helping our clients through this transition journey and when they are looking at implementing CCS solution, clearly we need to review whether the project made sense from a net zero perspective, right? And as Ian mentioned, they may very often qualify for sustainable or sustainability linked type of loan or investment. So this is very, very important aspect, I think, to unlocking capital for supporting those projects. And we should not forget that the board of application is very wide. I mean, when we look at the project we are for which we are providing advisory in the Netherlands, it was an industrial area whereby basically a hub is considered to capture CO2 and then to be injected offshore. So the full value chain there can benefit. And ultimately, yes, in the ESG, the environmental portion is very important from all the emission we'll be removing. Yep.
Thank you. And lastly, Priyantha.
Yes, obviously as a development bank, ADB considers ESG consideration a very important part of our assistance to any type of investment, any intervention which we are going to have. Particularly, obviously, whatever we do, it will have to be in line with the safeguard policy statement, what we have in the bank. So if you are not following that, they fall into that, obviously you cannot do anything. And if you look at even the recently approved energy policy, that also has certain ESG considerations embedded in the policy. For instance, if I give you one example, it says we are not going to support any coal-fired power plants. But if you have to have any interventions in coal power, it will have to be interventions which will not eventually extend the life of the coal power plant. So ESG considerations come into play in some form or the other in all these interventions which ADB is going to have. So it's important, this is an important consideration which we need to really, from that viewpoint, of course, the work which Ian was talking about is very, very important for us and moving forward so that eventually we can we can support the argument for these technologies, while not really disturbing the carbon lock-in argument in the investments. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the final question, and there will be time, I think, for have one or two questions from the audience at the end. The final question is to discuss collaboration. So it is evident that large CCUS investments require collaboration across key stakeholders. So we just want to discuss the different players that could work together, especially in the Asian context. So the question is, how can finance sector organisations collaborate to drive CCUS in Asia? And I'll start with Priyantha, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jocelyn. Of course, as I described, the development bank like ADB can be everywhere in this space. But then not all the others can come into all these areas. So we have to pick and choose where others cannot come in, and we can do a better job. I mean, for example, as I told you before, we can do things like initial project screening, policy support, creating the enabling environment, pre-feasibility support, and those things are things what commercial institutions, commercial banking institutions may not be able to take up easily, because we have the access to low-cost funds, we have access to technical assistance grants, and so we can do that part of the job. And then we can create that environment so that the other commercial banking institutions or commercial, financing can come in. But one example, for instance, if you take a completely different story, now let's say solar parks in India, for instance. Now, in the case of solar parks, what we put in as development banks, we created the infrastructure, all the park infrastructure, transmission lines for evacuation of power and so on, so that the investors can come in for power generation. So likewise, we can, even in this space, we can do things for the other, partners cannot easily come in because of financing constraints. And we can build that enabling environment so that the others can come in. Then the other investors can come in easily. The technology providers can come in easily. So I think that's my as far as our institution is concerned, that's what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mari?
Yes. Well, the knowledge sharing will be a very important step to drive CCUS in Asia. The Asia CCUS network, as well as Global CCS Institute, provide very important channels for this aspect. MUFG joined GCCSI this March, and we actively collaborate with the Asia CCUS network. We expect they can inspire more possible business opportunities and collaboration, such as region-wide hub and cluster projects to accelerate the CCUS development in Asia.
Thank you. Lionel?
Yep. Following on Mari's good words, I think it's good if you can collaborate to establish financing framework, for instance, to make sure projects are successful in raising financing and establishing the standards for due diligence, for instance. I mean, if we take ING's experience in our sectors, it's always good to have technical experts that are able to recognize the risk and maybe recognizing that developing this expertise within the banks is very helpful also to bring projects forward. So financial can be comfortable with the right due diligence being performed. And then I think as financial institution, maybe helping in the development and the recognition of carbon markets, a very important step as well, because as we mentioned, a lot of projects currently relying on subsidies, but I think in the long term, we want private capital to be able to support those, and it means that there need to be a revenue model, and carbon markets, I think, belong to that picture, right?
Thank you. Ian?
Thank you. I think from my perspective, it's the convening power potentially of the finance sectors that may be very, very helpful in the Asia Pacific region. These are organizations, and I say financial institutions, including the multilateral development banks, the investment organizations like the ADB, but also some of the private financial organizations like MUFG and ING. we've got broad international experience operating across borders and addressing some of these technical issues in other instances, and those lessons they can certainly bring to the discussions that are being held here. I think those organizations are also uniquely placed for bringing in conversations with some of the allied sectors that are going to be particularly important for supporting some of the institutional requirements in these regions. So working with governments around policy, development, legislation, perhaps, again, from an offering perspectives from some of their work elsewhere globally, but also some of their uniquely placed guidance, given their operation across a range of different sectors. And certainly these are these are organizations which are used to addressing these types of topics. I think they're uniquely placed in that regard, and they should continue to do so and play an important part of the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. And lastly, Wanda.
Yes, well, since if you ask me to talk about the collaboration between the financial sectors, I don't have much to add because there is not much commercialization especially in Asian region. But if you go to see the future, there must be a lot of collaboration. Not only between the financial sector, but between the government and also the older players in the regional sector, and for all those collaboration to realize, I think I must emphasize the technology is very important. Not only make it the project sizable and economical, but also the CO2 captured in one region one country should be transported to another country. So that means there needs to be the technology for the carrier ship, and this should be emphasized very much so.
Thank you. And thank you. That's the range of questions. And I guess broadly, a lot of the interest in the finance sector is now being driven by helping their clients target net zero emissions. Collaboration is hugely important, as well as meeting environmental, social and government goals, and regulation by government or frameworks by government help enable those. And so I think all the insights you provided are really quite interesting, and we could spend a lot of time discussing. Do we have time for a couple of questions from the audience to put to the panel?
I think we have time for one or two questions.
Yep.
There was an interesting one came pretty early in the session, which was regarding the value streams for CCUS. So from a banker's perspective, this may go mostly to Mari and Lionel, but what might be the expected value streams that you would consider from using CCUS technology, and that would be important from an investment banker's perspective?
Maybe I can start. I think in the early days, as we've seen, most value stream has been derived from subsidies, right, for the projects, which is we have to assess how sustainable that is in the long run and how safe the subsidies are when we look at projects. But I think we are seeing in certain geographies carbon markets developing. I think price needs to stabilize, or we'll have to take a holistic view on how this can be monetized in a way that banks get comfortable for supporting the project's economics. So clearly, yes, carbon credits are one of the value that can be derived from the project. And of course, if projects find use for the CO2 that is emitted, so some industrial application, but what we have seen so far is very often those are limited in size. So they may not be sufficient to support the project economically.
Okay, Mari, do you have anything to add to this one?
Yes. Well, what Lionel said made me think that this is linked to the bankability issue as well. When we say bankability, somebody asked that question, but it's really about the visibility of the cash flow. And we can estimate a cost side of the cash flow to a certain extent, but we need to have is how much revenue will be flowing in the coming years or decades. So the price of the value of the carbon could be with arbitrage, with carbon tax, for example. So government's policy is very relevant in determining the fate of the cash flow, and therefore we need to be mindful that what sort of regulatory support and government revenue underpin is available for the project.
Maybe to continue the thought process, I think we look at the part of the carbon monetization, but clearly there's 3 elements to carbon capture project. There's the capture itself, the transportation, and the storage. I guess capture and transportation can be provided as services where ultimately it comes back to, well, yes, where the revenue is derived from the carbon storage or utilization, but those can provide maybe more stable contracts in the term that they can be long-term with some form of fixed price agreement or service agreements which are more bankable. But then the risk will be fall on the last piece of the puzzle, which is the utilization or the storage.
Thank you, Lionel. We're going to have to wrap that up because we're going to need to move to the next panel. But thank you all very much for participating. I really appreciate your comments and the topics that we've discussed. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You know?
Yes, Jocelyn, I think we can move immediately to the following panel with our government representatives. So I will just do a quick switching off the spotlight on the screen, which hopefully works for everybody, and we can get going. So just hold on a second.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Welcome, Soda-san, and here we have Saleh and Zhangxian. Just a second. There we go.
Thank you. So I'd like to now introduce our next panel, which we're going to be talking about governments as drivers for CCUS in Australia. I have Dr. Zhang Xian from the Ministry of Science and Technology in China. I have Dr. Saleh Abdurrahman from the Ministry of Energy, Mineral and Resources in Indonesia. And I have Director Takeshi Soda from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. So thank you very much for joining tonight. And Wandong Cho will join us again for for one of the questions in the panel. So in this second session, we have these government representatives to discuss from a government perspective how we can start moving towards the deployment pathway presented by Carl earlier. And the first question that we're going to start with today is to ask the panelists to talk about their country's approach to CCUS and how their governments are boosting the investment climate for CCUS. Can I please ask Zhang to start?
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me well? Okay, thank you. In recent years, Chinese government paid special attention to CCS technology development, especially after the carbon neutrality goal announced by our President Xi Jinping, a series of policy and regulations has been adopted to promote CCS technology research and demonstration. Conducting full chain and large scale and integrated CCS technology demonstration project is first time included in our 40th five-year plan. And also the Chinese government has continually increased the CCS R&D demonstration funding in 40th five-year plan. More funding will be provided through National Key R&D program to support low cost, low energy penalty carbon capture storage technology, and also the new generation CCS technology development, and also the industrial application of CCS. Although CCS projects currently not included in the national market, national carbon market in China, but there are two helpful financial incentives were released last year to support CCS technology development in China. One is the Green Bond endorsed project catalog released by People's Bank of China. Another one is climate investment and financing pilot work plan released by the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. With those efforts, I believe CCS technology will develop rapidly in the next few years in China, and few large-scale CCS projects will be expected. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. Saleh?
Thank you, Jocelyn. I think what we do in Indonesia to attract investment, number one is we promote the investment under the current regulation, under the current cost recovery scheme in our oil and gas industry. We have one project already approved for the CCUS development, and I think that is starting the new era for CCUS deployment in Indonesia. Secondly, I think what we need is more clarity in regulation from operation into the under the clauses of the CCUS projects. Under our new draft regulation that we already put all clarity on what is expected from the company when they want to develop the CCUS projects in Indonesia. Thirdly, I think that we provide some signals on our draft regulation that those companies willing to invest in CCUS project in Indonesia will have some fiscal and non-fiscal incentives, including the access or the flexibility on the sharing of the carbon credit generated from the CCUS projects. That's what we do here in Indonesia, Jocelyn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Sono-san?
Hi, Jocelyn, long time not see you. And hi, Saleh-san.
Hi,
Zhang-san. Nice to see you. I'm Takeshi Soda, and then I'm the Director of Oil and Gas Division, but I'm also in charge of the CCS policy in Japan. And then thank you for the opportunity to introduce the CCS policy of Japan in this time. And then because in this January, we have just launched the CCS long-term roadmap study group with experts and industries in the aim of commercializing CCUS in Japan by 2030. Through those discussions at study group and also the hearing from the potential CCS operators, we found that two things. One is that legal rights for the exploratory drilling, injection, and storage of CCS are not properly guaranteed by law. And second, the scope and the period of the liability for CCS operators after CO2 injections are not clear. These are main obstacles for private companies and financial institutes to invest more in CCS projects in Japan. Therefore, the Japanese government would like to discuss these legal issues intensively this year and aim to establish a new law in the next year in order to clarify the legal rights related to the drilling, injection, and also the scope and period of legal responsibility after injection. In addition, with reference to other countries, we would like to discuss the government's incentive system to promote private investment in CCS and also to present a certain direction by the end of this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And it's about collaboration between governments that can significantly help CCUS deployment. And we briefly touched on collaboration in the last panel about how important that is. And, you know, it allows countries to learn from others' experience, to avoid pitfalls, same mistakes, to even plan for joint strategies. So, but this question is aimed from a government to government perspective. How can we accelerate CCUS? Amari touched on the Asia CCUS network that Japan had led the establishment. So I'd like to invite Soda-san to talk about Japan's perspective and maybe a little bit more about the Asia CCUS network.
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. As mentioned, as Mari-san mentioned before, that last year, we Japan launched the Asia CCUS network together with ASEAN countries and United States and Australia. In addition to these governments, more than 100 companies, research institutes, and international organizations from around the world are participating in the Asia CCUS network with the aim of developing CCUS throughout Asia through industry, academia, government collaboration. We are heading for establishing the CCUS network throughout Asia by sharing knowledge and experience on CCUS, by conducting potential studies, by establishing common laws, by formulating actual projects, and by building an Asia-wide storage network. In addition, AREA, as a secretariat, is also conducting human resource development program related to CCUS. Specifically, online training courses are being held to raise the level of CCUS personnel in each country and to expand the basis of CCUS personnel in the region. The Asia CCUS Network Forum is scheduled to be held on September 27th in this year in hybrid manner, both in person and online. We are really looking forward to your active participation at the forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Soda-san. Saleh?
Thank you, Jocelyn. I just want to thank Soda-san also for the Asia CCUS network. We enjoy that network, and I think we see that the collaboration among ASEAN member countries and Australia and US is a good opportunity to share everything, technical issues, economic issues, environmental issues. But if I may hope that as the players of the CCUS project in ASEAN conferences, mostly from multinational companies, I would suggest that we move forward more on the project development or pilot project and project development to increase, to accelerate the CCUS deployment. We already approved, as I said before, that one project already got the approval from our upstream oil and gas regulatory authority to start the CCUS injection, maybe in 2026. So from that perspective, that what we really need now is the more Soda-san on the project partnership, if you like. So try to meet all the business sectors from developing countries, and then we start to proceed with the project. That's what we hope from the collaboration. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you. Dr. Jiang?
Thanks, Chair. As our colleagues just mentioned that, the international cooperation is very important. And the technical readiness level of CCS is quite low at the moment. Probably not only in China, but also in other Asian countries. International cooperation is very important for CCS technology development, both bilateral but also multilateral, both globally and also regionally. Two things I would like to highlight here. First is, for network, probably we should start with a capacity building network in our platform. This is very important for technology transfer of CCUS and also for the project experience sharing. Secondly, the multilateral organizations such as CEM, CCS Initiative, CSF can play a very important role in such kind of network or platform to enhance or to increase the collaboration of government to accelerate CCS in Asian Pacific area. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Juna Wangdong was going to also provide an answer in this particular question too. If you could, thank you, Wangdong. Oh, please take yourself off mute.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much, Sasmin. I'd like to just add one aspect, and that is how to benefit of a recently revised Article 6 of the Paris Climate Agreement. As you know, the article now allows cross-border transfer of ITMOs, international transport mitigation outcomes. These are still some detail to clarify before its full utilization, but I think our region should be most beneficiary of the new system for that. Okay, for that, the framework agreement is required at the government level, which basically provides soft infrastructure like MRV mechanism for transparency and prevention of double counting. Of course, this will be followed by individual agreements on a project-by-project basis with regards to allocation of credit generated from mitigation outcome among project participants. This all be facilitated if countries involved in have same or at least a similar emission trading scheme. Korea's EMS is not perfect, but still in an infant stages as compared with the EU's. But it could be one example in Asia. I guess there is a role for ADB, I should emphasize, to play in this regard. ADB can be an introducer of various examples in the region and be intermediator for their fast reproduction within the region. Given the basic principle of national voluntarism adopted in the Paris Agreement regime, I'm sure that Asia can make a very valuable precedent for the vacuum created by Article 6 of the agreement. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for audience questions. There's some interesting ones coming in. So we should hopefully have about 5 to 10 minutes. So I'd just like to move on to the last question in this government discussion about the discussions around carbon CO2 storage. So finding, characterising and developing large volumes of CO2 storage is both expensive and absolutely vital for the deployment of CCUS in large scale. This is a major exercise that all countries, whether developed or emerging, will have to go through. Another key aspect here is the development of strategic hubs in which several emission sources could benefit from joint transport and storage infrastructure. So I guess more expanding on the previous question about collaboration. So, and I think Saleh had already touched on about hubs and multi-user facilities. So I guess the last question for the panel is how are countries advancing the exploration of CO2 storage options, including hubs and multi-user facilities? And we might have Carl come back and join us if we've got a bit of time. So I'd like to start with Saleh, please.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Even under the current oil and gas regulation that we already put there the possibility of having open access for pipeline if you want to transport the CO2. And you may also share the facility, the storage facility. So under the current regulation, we already accommodate if you want to develop the multi-source of CO2 emission in one, say, reservoir. Under our new draft regulation on CCUS, we also put the sharing facility that is possible for multi-source of emission, subject to, of course, the issues related to the cost associated with the project. So in our case, that we don't have any issues regarding we agree that to make the project is more cost effective, I think sharing the facility will be one option. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you. Dr. Zhao?
Thanks, Jocelyn. Currently, it is very difficult for most CCS projects to make profit. This is also, is the case in China, and CCS hubs and multi-user facilities development could dramatically reduce the overall cost of CCS technology deployment. However, the pipeline and other storage infrastructure development are also very costly. In China, the state-owned enterprises are encouraged to construct those relevant infrastructures for non-profit purpose. Currently, there are 6 CCS projects at million-ton level under planning and construction in China, and all of them are invested by state-owned enterprises like China Petrol, Sinopec, and the State Energy Group. I believe this is a very unique business model for China to promote CCS technology development, and also will be a good start for CCUS hub and pipeline network development in China. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Soda-san?
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. As I explained, since this January, METI had been intensively discussing various issues such as cost reduction and development of suitable site and improvement of business environment in preparation for the commercialization of CCUS by 2030. Our government will ask private companies to submit advanced CCS project concepts, including carbon cluster, and we will consider financial support for promising advanced CCS projects among them. Government support measures for CCS projects should cover not only the operation phase, but also the construction phase of the entire CCS value chain, including separation and capture, transportation, and storage, as is the case in advanced CCS countries in Europe and the United States. One example, a demonstration test will be conducted to establish a technology for transportation of liquefied CO2 by ship as an important technology for the CCS hub and cluster concept, which will require long-distance transportation from emission sources. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have time to include Carl?
Yes.
Thanks. I'll make it brief because I know there's a lot of questions, a lot of interest in this topic. Basically, just to say that the simultaneous development of storage resources is absolutely key for CCUS deployment. I mean, as much as I talked in the beginning about seeing announcements, project announcements for CCUS projects, most of these are on the capture side, and the development and really study of CO2 resources, the time frame is incredibly long to do the resource, do the site assessment, and then if that site is viable, develop that site. And so this needs to happen simultaneously if we have really any hope of matching source to sinks. Specifically within the region, there's opportunities for industrial hubs and clusters, especially in emissions intensive areas. And just given the geography of the region, there's potential to develop CO2 storage hubs as well, taking CO2 from different countries, having a host country store CO2. But this brings up a lot of legal and regulatory considerations as well. Are there international protocols like the London Protocol that must be abided by? Are the contractual terms right? Are there is there potential for open access to the storage infrastructure, not even to mention the transportation infrastructure? And these discussions should really be at the forefront of a lot of policymakers' minds right now, so that as the capture facilities start to come online, they have a place to store that CO2. Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Carl, and all great points. And thank you, everyone. I'm hoping we've got a couple of minutes to ask a couple of questions from the audience.
I think we do. There is an interesting one here. I wonder who's going to take this one first. But the question is, I would be interested to know whether the panelists believe that a pan-Asian carbon trading system is possible. Who would like to start on this one? Perhaps Soda-san, any thoughts on this?
What was that, Joe? Sorry.
So yeah, so the question is that do you believe that a pan-Asian carbon trading system could be possible?
Wow, that is interesting. It depends on how we see the CCUS projects worldwide, I think, and how we see that in terms of the support from financial institution to develop all projects in all countries. Those having, like in our case, that we already identified some 3 billion or more potential storage from depleted oil and gas resource, and that's possible under the legal framework for joint storage for CCUS. But again, I think the main issues for us now is, I think, for ASEAN countries, especially, if I may say that, on the support, on the financial support. That's the very critical issues that we face when we want to develop the hub, if you like, within the ASEAN countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe-san. To establish the carbon trade system, pan-Asia should be not impossible, but it will take time. And then, firstly, maybe we have to how to say, stabilize or setting up some kind of rule of the MRV of the carbon trade, especially for CCS. There's no kind of the common methodologies how to the count or how to measure or how to report or how to verify the carbon credit which has been produced by the CCS. In that sense, we have to set such kind of common rule among the Asian countries. That will be the first thing we should do. And also, I believe one of the hurdle to set up such kind of the carbon trade system would be the difference of the carbon price among countries. It really depends on each country. So it's not impossible, but I believe it's going to take time. Thanks.
Thanks, Jan. Any views from China? Changxian, do you hear? You seem to have frozen. Okay, perhaps we can wait a second and maybe he'll come back. It seems that Wong Dong has a comment.
sorry, I agree with Sato-san. It is not impossible, but it will take time. But at the bilateral level, I think it should be possible, and also has to be encouraged. I think this is very the merit of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So we should work very hard on at least a bilateral matter, bilateral dimension to cultivate this kind of joint carbon emission trading mechanism. Thanks.
Okay, I think we can end that here because we're almost close to time. Unfortunately, we've lost Dr. Zhang. But look, thank you very much, Soto-san, Wong Dong-chun, and Zhang. I hope you can still hear us. Really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope that the audience found that discussion interesting as well as I did. I'll pass that back to you for closing.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn, for a great moderation of both of the sessions today, and thank you to all the panelists for your insights. I wanted to very briefly mention before we end a couple of upcoming events. Indeed, I was already mentioned coming up on Friday this week. There is a deep dive workshop on CCUS meeting the challenge of scaling up in Asia. And please go on the ACEF 2022 website for the full information and the registration process to be able to follow this session, which should be very interesting. So that's on the coming Friday. And finally, the second point I wanted to make, if the slide agrees to move forward, is indeed to highlight that the next Clean Energy Ministerial meeting is going to take place 21st to 23rd of September, hosted by the United States Department of Energy in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the information on registration and program will be available very shortly, but I think it suffices to say that it will be a big event with not just the ministerial content, but lots of other clean energy content, conferences, side events, etc., around the ministerial event, and open to all those who want to register and travel to Pittsburgh then in September. So more info will be coming up on this one in the coming weeks, really. And I believe that with that, we are going to be ending the session today, and thanking all our panelists and all our audience for your time, for being with us this afternoon or evening, and we look forward to seeing you at our next events. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Juho. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Soda-san.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Sara-san.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.